Hey everyone, Minutia Minute here, coming at you with a quick follow-up to Murder Week. So if you don't know what Murder Week is, for the 365 movie challenge that I'm taking on this channel, in January week 3, I watched and reviewed 7 movies in which murder is somehow central to the premise. That doesn't mean I watched a bunch of slashers. That doesn't mean I watched a bunch of whodunits. I watched a whole range of movies in which murder is sort of central to the story. I looked at Le Samurai, which is a movie about an assassin. I looked at The Voices, which is a movie about a serial killer. So on and so forth. Go check out the video if you haven't checked it out yet. Of course, murder is a huge topic. There are tons of movies out there in which murder is somehow central to the premise or to the story, and I actually watched one more, and I wanted to talk about it with you guys today. I didn't want to wait a whole nother week because murder is not going to be the topic of next week's video, number one. And number two, it's a movie that everybody's been talking about over the last week. I like to watch YouTubers who talk a lot about horror movies, and there's not much bigger an event that can happen in the horror world than when a new Scream movie comes out. Now, I wanted to throw my 2 cents into the great Scream debate of 2022. I've only watched a few videos and I've kind of tried to steer clear of like deep dives on the movie. I'm excited to look at those after I record this video, but I have seen a few things here or there. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of noticing Master Chaos's review, which was subtitled "Is Scream 5 the New Force Awakens?" which completely colored my experience of the whole movie while I was watching it. I couldn't unthink that thought while I was sitting in the theater, which is maybe unfortunate. Either way, just that title alone got my juices flowing and made me really want to get in on the conversation and talk about the movie. Understand that this review is going to be spoiler heavy. Like, I am assuming that you've seen the movie. I'm not really going to talk a lot about the premise or the story. I'm just going to talk about my thoughts. So not only is this review probably going to spoil the movie for you if you haven't seen it, but it's also probably not going to make a lot of sense because I'm not going to give a ton of context. I'm assuming that you've already seen it. So for those of you guys who have not clicked off on this video yet, what did I think of Scream 2022, aka Scream 5? There's definitely a lot of good to be had here. Overall, like, the script is fairly well written, the characters are relatively well realized, the structure of the movie as a whodunit was solid. Overall, decent craftsmanship. There were elements of the direction that I found were kind of cheap and soap opera-y. There's a lot of, family members sitting at a bed or sitting in a hotel room or whatever, just kind of talking to each other and like hashing out their problems that made the movie feel very much like a daytime soap opera. But other than that, the direction was very coherent and very capable. I'm not actually huge fans of the directors of this movie. I don't know their names. I know they go by like Radio Silence or whatever. The only other movie of theirs that I saw was Ready or Not, which I know is kind of a cult favorite, and I'm probably going to get a bunch of dislikes for saying I actually hate that movie. Literally, passionately hate it. I think because that was a movie that had a lot of potential that was just kind of squandered for me. In that movie, you have Samara Weaving, who's a decent actress, but she plays everything super one note. Like, her character in that movie is she's a bride and she wears Converse and she says fuck whenever something crazy happens in front of her. Like, that's literally the extent of her character. There's an element of commentary in the movie that's about, the aristocracy and the elite and the rich versus the, working class in America. And there's definitely like a very meaningful discussion to be had there. But I didn't think that Ready or Not really rose to the occasion of it, because largely it's a film whose message the filmmakers have largely already made up their mind about. So they're not really engaging you in discussion. They're just kind of mansplaining to you about how obviously evil rich people are, and that's kind of the end of the story. So everything just kind of comes off very two-dimensional. I'm not saying that, you can't have a bunch of nasty rich people as your bad guys. Like, I'm all for that, but it just didn't make for very interesting storytelling, and I just didn't think that, the stuff that happened in that movie was particularly earned. Now, of course, this is a Scream 5 review and not a Ready or Not review, but I think that context is actually kind of relevant, because even though the film was competently made, the cast was decent, The script was okay. The story structure was solid enough. This movie hit on two pet peeves that I have that I just can't let go of and really detracted from my enjoyment of the movie. And one of the reasons I wanted to make a point of doing this review is I've actually almost done this review two other times on this channel in the last couple of months, and I've just kind of run out of steam. Like by the time I'm ready to talk about it, I don't actually get around to it. And what better time to have that conversation than after watching this new Scream movie? Of course, those of you guys who are Scream fans out there, these films are very meta. The original film does a great job providing commentary on like the state of both culture but also like the horror genre in 1996. Scream 2 and 3, it gets very self-referential and the commentary gets, dare I say, a little inbred because it's very wink wink nudge nudge. And then Scream 4 came along and I felt like really nailed it again because there was something to say about the horror genre in the moment, and that movie said it. We were in the middle of a period where everything was a reboot. Scream 4 did a great job of playing on that. But the key to that movie was that Scream 4 was not itself a reboot, and also served as a great example of what a true sequel could be. Fast forward to Scream 2022. This is a film that's trying to have commentary on films. Of course, the problem is we're actually in a pretty good period for horror films, I feel like, right now. I'm sure that's fighting words, but, even the characters in the movie are talking about, like, the new era of horror that's, like, extremely socially relevant or, more than just jump scares, quote unquote. They talk about the Babadook. They mentioned Get Out, I think, at some point. Just so many great examples of classic modern horror films that are all very relevant and have come out over the last few years. And so then the question is, what do you pick apart in a Scream movie? And this is where the movie really misstepped for me and pretty much caused me to check out for the remainder of the film. And that is they start picking on requels. They call them requels. I've always called them rebootquels, but potato potato, I guess. But ultimately, they kind of are criticizing Hollywood in general for the idea of making a sequel that looks like it's supposed to be a sequel. It has the original cast, but first they're passing the torch to a new cast, and second, the movie is basically a remake or a retelling of the original film, just with a new rapper, new characters, but somehow all the same events that you've already seen before. I tolerated it in The Force Awakens, which was really the first film to really bring that to the forefront. But that movie had a lot of great characters, a lot of fun action. It was sort of a return to form for nostalgic Star Wars, so I could kind of let it go. Another reason I'm probably going to get hate here is I am somewhat of a Last Jedi defender. I know it's not the best movie. I'm not saying that it is, but at least it surprised me. And, it's funny because even that movie is sort of a low-key remake of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, just kind of rearranged a little bit. But it went in new directions, and even though people hated it, it was nice watching a Star Wars movie I hadn't seen before. That's all I'll say about The Last Jedi. I don't want everyone to unsubscribe, so I'll just stop right there. People didn't like The Last Jedi, so Hollywood immediately went back to the rebootquel formula because it was so successful with Force Awakens. Even just in the last few months, we've gotten multiple rebootquels. Most notably Ghostbusters, Afterlife, and Matrix Resurrections. And to be honest, I found both of those movies to be completely infuriating. Especially Ghostbusters, because the first half of Ghostbusters was like walking through a Ghostbusters museum and everyone's just showing you Ghostbusters props and nothing happens. And then right when you're about to fall asleep, the plot starts and oh my god, it's literally the original Ghostbusters. I was so irritated at the end of that movie, to be honest with you guys. Matrix Resurrections, kind of a different beast a little bit because it's, half a sequel and half a rebootquel. It's sort of entering this weird territory. But The Matrix Resurrections did something interesting, which is that the whole first hour of the movie is the writers explaining to you why you don't really want to watch this movie to begin with, which I thought was pretty bold. Like, by the time I was done with that part of the movie, I was like, gosh, maybe I should just leave because they pretty much convinced me that I don't want to watch what's coming. Now, here we are with Scream, and they've kind of done the same thing because unlike Scream 4, which picked on reboots but was itself a sequel, this is a movie that picks on rebootquels while literally being a rebootquel. And you can't just tell the audience about rebootquels and like somehow be off the hook for that. Similar to The Matrix Resurrections and Ghostbusters, the further I got into it, the more my heart kind of sank. Now, this movie almost gets away with it because, it's about killers who are obsessed with the original Stab and they're recreating the events. And so there definitely is an interesting meta narrative to be mined from there, but there's two problems with it. The first problem is Kevin Williamson, when he made fun of horror tropes, it was funny. And Scream 5, aka Scream 2022, isn't funny. It just kind of comments on stuff, but it's not entertaining, and it doesn't make you laugh or chuckle or think. It just kind of tells you about it, which I thought was a huge missed opportunity. The other problem is you've got the original cast passing the torch, like you see in all of these movies, and the fact of the matter is Sidney Prescott, Courtney Cox, Dewey. Sorry, I can't remember Courtney Cox's character's name. The point is, those characters are not relevant characters in the movie. Dewey kind of is, but everybody else is completely superfluous. And so whenever they're on screen, the movie grinds to a halt. And so the further you get towards the end of the movie, the more it's going to drag. And just because you called the movie out as a rebootquel in advance isn't going to change the narrative problems that rebootquels have. Now, I mentioned two pet peeves in this movie, and the second one was around the villains and their motive. So the big twist in this is the people doing the killings are toxic fans. Ghostbusters 2016 did this as well. Your movie's not a movie without the audience. Does a tree make a noise when it falls in the woods? If people don't watch your movie, it automatically has no meaning. And I feel like in recent years especially, there's been this trend among artists to blame fans or blame the viewer for not getting their vision right or appreciating what they were trying to do or turning, their creative endeavor into something quote unquote toxic. I just don't subscribe to that argument, and Scream 5 leans into it, and even though the way they did it was still kind of clever, it still really pushes my buttons, because at the end of the day, the audience is what makes your film. You can tell someone that they got it wrong, but you should have done a better job presenting what it was you wanted to say to the audience. And this is where that Ready or Not piece of it kind of comes back in. Ready or Not is a movie that already knows exactly what it wants to say. It's not engaging you in a conversation philosophically about what it has to say. It's just telling you this is what you should think and feel. And there's like no gray area. There's no room to explore. There's no room for thought. Scream 5 kind of does the same thing with the villains. Like, it automatically puts the idea of toxic fandom in a box, makes them the serial killers, end of discussion. And so now their movie's critic proof, because if I say I don't like it, I'm just someone who's equated with these serial killers now. And that's nonsense. And I think that artists need to find a little humility again, because there's just been so many examples of this where, an artist blames the fans for something not going the way that they wanted it to. Does toxic fandom exist? Sure, but that's kind of like blaming comic books for kids committing crimes. Like, the art doesn't create the toxic behavior. Toxic behavior is going to exist, and there's going to be an outlet for it to come forth from. And it just so happens that right now, it's in these fan communities. Fandom is the family structure of the internet. So, it's not that Star Wars fans are toxic necessarily. People are toxic. Star Wars is an outlet for people to be toxic in. So the question is, where does that leave me with Scream 5? I actually feel a lot better having gotten that off my chest. if it didn't push the toxic fandom button and the rebootquel button, I probably would have went away relatively satisfied. Those are just two things that cause me to really check out, especially the rebootquel, because once you say this is what it is, then why am I watching it? I already know I've seen everything. There's no tricks. It didn't help that, the killer for maybe the first time for me in a Scream movie wasn't a surprise. And so you just find yourself waiting for the movie to end. I don't know if I'm being too harsh. I would love to know. Like, do you guys have that feeling when you watch these rebootquel movies? Like, for me, I just completely check out because it just reminds me of another movie I've already seen, and it's another movie that's better than this movie. And that's the other kind of tricky thing about rebootquels is like people don't know how to engage and challenge them directly because there's this, oh, it's not a reboot, so I can't review it like it's a reboot. It's a reboot. Like just because they put another character in it, you're copying other material. They're playing mind games with you by acting like it's a sequel. It doesn't make it a sequel. It's competently made. The performances are decent. The direction is acceptable at times, exceptional at other times. And all in all, it did feel like another Scream movie. If it wasn't so dependent on the first Scream, it would have felt like a sequel, which is what I want to feel when I go see a sequel to any movie. If you guys saw Scream, I'm hoping you saw it if you watched this video, because again, I'm just rambling. It's not going to make much sense if you haven't seen it. Let me know down in the comments. What did you think about it? Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video. If you didn't like it or you hated my comments, you can leave a dislike, but I would actually love if you left a comment down below. Tell me why I'm wrong. I would love to have this discussion with you. I would love to open my mind about Scream 5 and just continue exploring this movie because I am on the fence about it. Overall, decent movie. Unfortunately, it really hit all of my pet peeves in one film, which unfortunately is going to make it one of my less favorite Scream movies. They left a lot of ideas on the table for a potential sequel, so maybe it has the chance to grow from here. But then, of course, the question is Scream 6 just going to be The Last Jedi? We'll see. All right, hope you guys have a good week in movies, and I'll talk to you guys soon.